Today's broadcast is brought to you by viewers like you. Become a member today and unlock exclusive content at patreon.com/NorthstarRadio. Well, folks, the primary elections are upon us. It's that time once again where we put on our democracy hats and head on out to our democracy buildings. Whether it's a church, nursing home, community center, we're there to do our civic duty of electing a nominee for the President of the United States.
We start in the United States and the outcome of Super Tuesday, the biggest day so far in the race for the White House.
On one side, the frontrunner is an incredibly racist old man. It's been nearly 4 years since we've had someone like that in office. I was so young I can't even imagine what that was like.
An innocent young woman who was killed by an illegal. That's right. But how many of thousands of people being killed by illegals?
Fortunately, we have the ever-trustworthy and reliable Democratic Party to come and save the day, with their frontrunner, an incredibly anti-racist young man. That can't be right. Is this the future of our country? Two sides of the same senile coin? With the state our country is in, and I'll be honest, it's been in this state for about 60 years, it's normal to feel an immense amount of hopelessness. However, there is a way for your voice to be heard. The primary elections happen every 4 years in the spring leading up to the presidential elections in the fall. The purpose of the primary elections are for the Democratic and Republican Party of each state to choose a nominee for the presidential election. It's meant to be a completely democratic process, where any average Joe can make their voice heard and vote for the person they most want on the ballot come fall. But are the primaries actually as democratic as they claim to be? Let's take an 8-year look back at an election that, although I could not participate in, first got me interested in politics, the 2016 primary election.
CNN projects that Donald Trump will be the winner of the New Hampshire Republican primary. We also project that Bernie Sanders will be the winner of the Democratic primary.
The matchup was between a war criminal, Hillary Clinton.
We came, we saw, he died.
And everyone's favorite socialist mayor turned senator, Bernie Sanders.
All right, but who knows about cocaine? Anyone ever seen cocaine?
Yes.
All right. Hold it one at a time. What about cocaine? Good thing, bad thing, what?
As we all know, Hillary Clinton ultimately walked away with the Democratic Party nomination, and then very dramatically lost to Donald Trump, something absolutely no one saw coming. Many people are of the belief that if Bernie Sanders had won the primaries, he would have likely beat Trump in the presidential election. Because let's face it, a huge chunk of the country are misogynists, even a lot of women. In the 2016 primaries, Hillary Clinton beat Bernie Sanders by only an 8% margin, compared to the 2020 primaries when Joe Biden beat Bernie Sanders by a whopping 25% margin. This Bernie guy is really good at getting second place. It's almost like there's a reason for this trend. And it's not because he's unpopular. It might actually be that he's too popular. Just look at this color-coded map of individual donors from the 2020 primaries. Clearly, Bernie Sanders is an incredibly popular candidate no matter where you go in the country. While the other candidates did very well in their respective states, Bernie Sanders received donations from all over the country, and not just in the urban areas, but in the rural areas as well. I was unable to find a map like this for the 2016 primaries. However, you can see a clear pattern of popularity when looking at percentage of contributions from small donors. Hillary Clinton received nearly $77 million in donations that year, but only 17% of that came from small donations, anything $200 or less. Compare that to Bernie Sanders, who received only $40 million in donations. A whopping 77% of his contributions were from small donors. Clearly, Bernie Sanders was the candidate of the working class, the people who keep this country afloat. So how come he didn't win the primary election? There's this funny thing called superdelegates. A delegate is basically someone who represents voters at a party's nominating convention. They typically have to follow the outcome of the primary elections when nominating a candidate. However, superdelegates don't have to. They basically get to decide who they're nominating before the primary election has even taken place. And in the case of the 2016 primaries, with the hopes of electing the first ever female president, many superdelegates prematurely announced their support for Hillary Clinton, leading to a very possible bias in American voters.
We're learning today that a new book that is coming out by Donna Brazile, the former acting chair of the Democratic National Committee, that the campaign of Secretary Hillary Clinton was far more influential at the Democratic Party, the Democratic National Committee, than we previously knew. Do you think, though, that what we're learning from Donna Brazile's book suggests that the campaign, that what the Democratic National Committee did, meant this election was rigged?
Yeah, I think it was.
Do you see how this isn't very democratic? But just wait. There's more. Thanks to the folks over at WikiLeaks, several email exchanges between DNC staff members were leaked. In these emails, much discussion and criticism was being made about Bernie Sanders. They even contain evidence of possible sabotage to the Bernie campaign by the DNC. In one email, they discuss his lack of religious affiliation, and in another, they discuss the scheduling of the televised Democratic Party debates, where they seemingly brainstorm ways in which to limit his exposure to the public eye. All this being said, it's quite obvious that primary elections contain a whole lot more bias and a whole lot less democracy than we're made to believe. But what about the 2024 primaries? There are currently 3 frontrunners for the Democratic nomination, but let's be honest, it's definitely going to be Joe Biden. The other 2 frontrunners are Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson. Dean Phillips is from St. Paul, Minnesota, which is pretty cool as a Minnesotan, but he's just another basic status quo liberal. Marianne Williamson seemed pretty cool in the beginning, seemingly a progressive Democrat in the Bernie sphere of influence, even having gone on the famed hasanabi broadcast. But in recent months, especially with the escalation of war crimes in Palestine brought on by Israel and the Biden administration, people have been hesitant to support Williamson, as her solution to the crisis is a 2-state solution. Basically a continuation of the apartheid. Imagine if people's solution for South African apartheid was a 2-state solution, where black people had their country and white people had their country. That's simply a continuation of apartheid. The word literally means discrimination based on race. Then we have Joe Biden, who's basically Donald Trump in a good guy costume. Same domestic policies, same foreign policies. He's just not vocally racist like Donald Trump. It's quite obvious who's going to be on the ticket come fall. 2 old racist men fighting for the same 300-year-old system. And that's not just my opinion. Several state branches of the Democratic Party have taken drastic measures to ensure that Joe Biden will win the Democratic nomination. In Florida, they made it literally impossible to vote for anyone else, automatically sending all 250 delegates to Joe Biden. They quite literally canceled the DNC primary election. And they're not even the only state doing this.
They also did it in Tennessee, North Carolina, and Massachusetts. Don't you just love democracy?
Yes. 4 different state Democratic parties are withholding the primary process from occurring, automatically sending all their delegates to Joe Biden. Oh, but China doesn't have elections. Cuba doesn't have elections. No, we don't have elections. At least not nationally. Local elections are a different story. That's why they're the much more important elections. So what can we do? It's very common to feel hopeless in this situation. All we really can do is scare the Democratic Party. Fortunately, there's a dark horse on the ballot. Someone absolutely no one saw coming. Uncommitted. Historically, Uncommitted has appeared on primary ballots of several states, but this time around it's heavily in the public discourse.
Activists with the Listen to Michigan campaign are calling on Democrats to vote uncommitted instead of voting for the incumbent Democratic president, Joe Biden.
Uncommitted.
Uncommitted has actually won a couple of delegates to the Democratic convention.
States like New Hampshire, West Virginia, and my home, Minnesota, have historically had Uncommitted as an option for many Democratic primaries. One state in particular has Uncommitted on the ballot this year, and let's just say they're very uncommitted.
Michigan will be one to watch this November for several reasons. During Tuesday night's Democratic primary, more than 100,000 Michiganders sent a message to President Biden casting an uncommitted vote in protest of his administration's handling of Israel's war on Gaza.
Yes, on February 27th, 2024, only a couple weeks ago, 101,000 people voted uncommitted in the Michigan primaries.
We organized this in less than 3 weeks. So, this was the most amazing thing to have happened, to have over 100,000 Michiganders, Democrats. I would say the majority, vast majority of whom voted for Biden in 2020.
And Michael Moore couldn't be more correct. Most of these people voting uncommitted were likely former Biden voters, sending a clear signal to the Biden administration that you have disappointed us and you will no longer receive our support. Many liberals, however, were not happy about the popularity of voting uncommitted. Nina Turner, a former Ohio State senator and supporter of the uncommitted vote, went on CNN to discuss this, and when she began explaining the context as to why someone would want to vote uncommitted, she was quickly interrupted by IDF supporter Anderson Cooper.
I am young enough to remember, colleagues, when Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib and also Congresswoman Cori Bush called for a ceasefire very early on. They were called abhorrent. Now, fast forward to all of these bodies laying in the wake and people who are living through this every single day.
By the way, there's also been slaughter in Israel.
I was going to say.
There's a lot of pain on both sides.
I'm not
a lecture on the problem, but I'm talking about the politics of this tonight. What to you would be a victory, as somebody was calling for this uncommitted vote, what to you would be a victory tonight to get that message across?
I'm not denying that pain. All I'm saying that at a certain point after October the 7th, it becomes clear. I mean, you have a right-wing prime minister.
Right. We don't need to debate the issue.
But you understand what I'm saying? I'm not denying anybody's pain. What I am saying is that this president and our country has the power to say to Netanyahu, we need a permanent ceasefire. The only time hostages...
Reason, though, if I can push back here,
one more point. The only time hostages were released is when we had that brief ceasefire. That is another reason why...
Some people are using this opportunity to conflate uncommitted voters with Trump supporters. A Gen Z industry plant for the DNC by the name of Dash Dabrowski said this: if you voted uncommitted in Michigan instead of voting for Biden, you're a Trump-supporting terrorist. Tell me this guy is an AI right now. Many liberals think a vote against Biden is a vote for Trump, but it's the primaries. That's not even how they work. And even come fall, I'd argue that a vote against Biden is not a vote for Trump. Voting uncommitted is a way to show the Democratic Party that I'm supposed to be on your side, but you have done so little for me, and you've done so much evil around the world, that you will no longer receive my support, and I am willing to vote for nobody in order to get my point across. It's ultimately meant to scare the Democratic Party, and it already seems to be working, at least a little bit.
And given the immense scale of suffering in Gaza, there must be an immediate ceasefire. For at least the next 6 weeks.
I, for one, will absolutely be voting uncommitted. I remember the first time I ever voted. It was the primary elections in 2020. I'm honestly unsure of who I voted for exactly, but embarrassingly, I think it was Andrew Yang. Yes, I believe I voted for Andrew Yang over Bernie Sanders. I was a baby socialist, okay? I had no idea what I was doing. But this time around, I'm not gonna make the same mistake. The election process isn't a time for you to vote for the lesser of two evils. The voting process is a time to tell the Democratic Party and the government as a whole that you do not support them or their actions here at home and especially around the world. This time around, I'll be doing exactly that. I begrudgingly voted for Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election, but what he's proven to me over the past 4 years is that he does not deserve my vote the second time around. He is a senile conservative cloaked in a good guy costume, which is why I'm voting uncommitted. And I'm not at all alone in this protest.
My name's Quinn. I'm 25, a leftist, and voting uncommitted.
My name is Gab. I'm 25. I'm voting uncommitted.
As far as who I'm voting for when it comes to the Democratic primary, I'm going to vote uncommitted.
So I will be voting, but I'll be voting uncommitted.
I will be voting uncommitted in the primaries to be a part of the most democratic way to send a message to the Democratic Party.
I think people voting uncommitted is one of the few examples we've had of actually seeing democracy in action lately. It's clear to anyone with even a shred of decency that a line's been crossed, and instead of kowtowing to Biden's 99% fascism out of fear of Trump's 100% fascism, they're instead using their moment in the booth to speak their piece.
There's no one in the Democratic Party that I trust to handle this issue. It used to be Bernie, or AOC, whatever. You know who I do trust? Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar.
What doesn't frustrate me about the Democratic Party? There's so much. But at the very top of the list, and the only thing that matters now, is the deaths of tens of thousands of people.
This is the first time I've been able to vote in a presidential election. And growing up, I thought I'd be excited for this because my dad would always talk about how important voting is. Not because it really means anything, just because of all the bullshit that black people had to go through in order to be able to vote.
Even self-described progressives are pulling the "it's complicated" card and shaming anyone who dares criticize Biden and his campaign.
I'm not sure whether this democracy thing is working, period. I don't think voting uncommitted is a wasted vote. These f***ers don't want to lose their positions of power, and they're going to do anything to maintain them.
For the Democrats, Biden wins about 70% of the vote, but nearly 20% voted for uncommitted. A protest vote against Biden and his handling of the Israel-Hamas war and dissatisfaction with the options.
If you hadn't seen that uncommitted movement, who would you be voting for otherwise?
Probably would have stayed home.
I don't think I would have come out to vote had there not been the protest movement for the uncommitted vote, because I think that that is the case, that we are pretty locked into the two candidates as they stand right now.
Time is running out for the Democratic Party, so they better wake the fuck up and listen to their base.
America's so cute for thinking that democracy is still a thing.
I don't think I'm alone in saying that every day I live in constant fear of America's continued descent towards fascism. But for the time being, considering the popularity of the uncommitted vote, the music's bumping, the alcohol's flowing, and maybe, just maybe, the kids are all right. Thank you for watching North Star Radio. Peace and love, and free Palestine.